Morning you guys, it's Karen and I wanted to tell you about my experience with an animal psychic. So before I do, let me tell you kind of where I'm coming from and my beliefs. I'm very, very cynical and I'm not a believer in psychics per se, but I do go and see them, I do watch them, I'm very interested in it all because I suppose I want to be proven wrong. I would love to see something that makes me believe in it. But I've also read Derren Brown's, I can't remember what the title of the book is, but it's about cold reading. It may well be called Cold Reading. And so I'm aware that a lot of it is luck, a lot of it is coincidence, etc, etc. But since getting Watson, I've been really interested in the whole animal communication. And I think my curiosity came from Watson being such a complex little dog. He's so unlike a dog in a lot of ways, and he's so puzzling. He's just, some of the things he does, nobody can explain why, and so I think that's where my curiosity came from. And he doesn't play with toys. He's not particularly an other dog, although he is a bit more now, you know, playing with other dogs. And so I was always desperate to make sure that I gave him a really good life. And it was like, am I doing that? You know, have I succeeded? Do you like the places you go for walks for? Why don't you like cuddling? These are the kind of questions that I had. And so I wrote down all of the questions that I had. This is before I'd even gone to anybody, because you may or may not know that I am a believer in The Secret or the law of attraction. I do believe that that works. Not necessarily the whole vibrations thing, but it definitely has worked for me in the past, the law of attraction. And so I thought maybe by writing these questions down, the universe would somehow bring me the answers, and it may be through an animal psychic. And I thought that would maybe allay some of my worries about Watson, because I probably spent the last 4 years, he's nearly 5, I probably spent the last 4 years worrying about him for one reason and another. Is he happy? Is he healthy? Is he in pain? Because he's a very stoic dog as well. So I looked into different psychics all over the world. I watched different videos and then I started to see, is there any locally? The one that I watched that I was really impressed with was Anna, I think it's called, she's called Breitenbach, Anna Breitenbach, and it was her with a black panther, and she had gone to see, the guy had asked her to go and see his black panther that he had rescued called Diablo, which means devil, because it wouldn't go outside, it wouldn't leave its enclosure, and he wanted to give it a good life and was like, I'm kind of clutching at straws here. He wasn't a believer. But she went and she sat and talked to the Black Panther, and the Black Panther had said he didn't want to be called the devil, and so they changed his name to Spirit. And I think it was later that day, after she'd gone, the Black Panther went out into its enclosure and was a completely different cat from that day onwards. And the guy was then a believer, you know. And so I don't know whether that is energy, that maybe he felt like somebody was taking an interest in the Black Panther. I don't know what it was, but that really impressed me. Unfortunately, she wasn't local. But I found a few local, just to let you know, I'm not going to be saying names here. You may be able to figure it out from what I'm saying, but I'm not going to name names because I didn't have a good experience, but I'm not here to, you know, slander anybody's business or take away anybody's belief that's had a good experience with this person. I'm just going to tell you what happened to me. I got in touch with one person who said they were very, very busy and they were going to contact me in a month. I never heard from them. I chased them up. I never heard anything more. So I kind of left that, because that sort of lack of communication bothers me, because if you are an animal communicator, some of them call themselves animal psychics, but most of them call themselves animal communicators, then surely you can communicate with humans and just, you know, let people know what's going on. So I sort of put her aside and I looked at two others that had been, both of them have been on TV. I think both of them have written books. I've read one of them. And there was one that offered where you could get in touch with them, say you wanted a reading, and then you would be put on a waiting list. There was definitely a waiting list, and when the waiting list has ended, which for me was 6 months, I think it was this time last year that I contacted her, and it was actually her secretary that got back to me, and she said, you're on the waiting list and in 6 months time you'll get a communication. And so what happens is, and it's only this one that I could find, and she's all over the UK, but she will give you a first impressions reading. If you read that and it encourages you and you find that you believe it, you can then go ahead and book a proper reading with her, whereby you would do a Skype call and sit down with the dog on your lap, and she would communicate through the camera to the dog and ask any questions that you had, any specific questions you had. But for the first impressions reading, it would just be, you would send her some photos, she would give her first impressions of the dog. So that appealed to me because there was no financial commitment, because they're a lot of money. They're about £200, £200 to £300 depending on who you go to. So I thought, unless I was super impressed, it's unlikely I would go ahead, because I thought somebody would look at a photo of Watson and say, he's a dog, he must like chicken, he must like playing with balls, he must like other dogs, and none of these things are true for Watson. So I felt that maybe that initial reading would put me off, but if it didn't, then I would have considered going ahead. So I got put on the waiting list, and I didn't hear anything. She did say you'd probably hear something around about December, and like I said, that was about May last year. And in December I got an email from the assistant saying that, can you send some photos across? You should hear from her within the next couple of weeks. And so I was like, great, this is going to happen before Christmas. I sent across some photos, and then I got a response from the actual psychic saying, these photos aren't good, he looks... Now, let me get the exact email. I can't find the exact email. I've got many emails from her, but I can't find that exact one. But it was something like, can you send me some more photos? Because in the photos you've sent, he looks unhappy and resistant. That was my initial kind of, I'm not really comfortable with this, because firstly, I think, and it made me really upset. I cried my eyes out at the time, because like I said, I was very worried that Watson wasn't enjoying life, because there was nothing that seemed to give him an awful lot of enjoyment. You know, like I said, he didn't like toys, he didn't particularly like playing with other dogs. There's one that he does, but he wasn't really interested in anything. It didn't seem like he was that enthused about life. So it really upset me, and I felt that that was an unprofessional thing to say, firstly. I thought, you don't tell a client that their dog is unhappy before, you know, just from a photo. But the other thing is, Watson has always looked grumpy in his photos. He's never looked like a happy dog in his photos. We've said since the minute he was a puppy and we got him that he looks like an old man, he looks like a grumpy old man. And people have commented on that over the years, you know, he doesn't look happy. And it kind of got my suspicions up, because what I had done with the photos is, and bearing in mind I do photography, so these were very clear photos, and I made sure his eyes were showing, which isn't easy. But I wanted to send photos where there was no toys in the picture, there was no other dogs in the picture, there was no balls in the picture, so that nothing could be kind of picked up from the picture. It was just Watson. So I sent across another picture, and she said that she wanted one with a full body. So she asked again for more pictures, and I sent more pictures. And she then replied and said, could you send these in high resolution? And so I changed those photos to high resolution and sent them back to her. And she replied to that email saying, I asked for new photos, not the same ones. And at that point, I just felt like she was being so abrupt in her emails, you know, and I thought, I'm not sure what else you want. By this point, I had sent her about 6 or 7 photos. And like I said, I'm a photographer, and so I can't imagine, you know, I do photography, I can't imagine somebody that hasn't got a clue about taking pictures of dogs, how they would have that many pictures to send her. They'd have to stop and try and take pictures, and it's not an easy thing to do. And like I said, I felt like she was being really abrupt. But anyway, it didn't make sense that she was saying, I asked for new photos and you've just sent me the same ones. And I replied and I said, you asked me for high resolution pictures of the ones I had sent, and that's what I've done. I was trying my hardest to be polite and courteous, because obviously this is somebody that's going to be doing a reading. I don't want to end up in an argument with them, and there's nobody else that I could see in the UK that offers this service whereby they give you a reading for free, and what it says on her website is if you don't then move forward with the actual reading, she gives you first impressions. If you don't go forward, there's no hard feelings, you just go your separate ways. There's nobody else that offers that kind of service. Normally you have to pay up front. I know some of you will be wanting to know who it is. If you are interested in a reading, because she offers this service, you'll be able to find her if you search for Animal Communicators in the UK. So anyway, eventually she agreed that the photographs were okay, and she said, I will be giving you a reading next week. And that was just before Christmas, so it was at the beginning of December. And so I sat and waited, and I didn't get anything the second week in December, the third week in December, and I was thinking, wow, is she going to do it like on Christmas Eve? And I was so excited. I was constantly checking my emails because this first impressions email was going to come through in December. But Christmas Eve came and went, Christmas Day came and went, the whole of the Christmas period came and went, and I heard nothing. And I was really disappointed in that, because again, she had specifically told me that she would be doing the reading. I think she'd said the second week of December, because it was the first week of December we agreed the photos, and she said, I'll get back with some first impressions then. Meanwhile, as you probably know, we found out that Watson had cancer. So that was it was the day after Boxing Day that we found out, because he'd had this little lump removed just before Christmas. We didn't for a second think it was anything, but we found out the day after Christmas that it was cancer. And that obviously was all my mind was thinking of, but I just thought, I don't know what's happened to this psychic, whether she's ever going to get in touch. But when she does get in touch, I'll tell her that can we delay the first impressions, because he's ill, and I want it to be when he's not ill, obviously, because that won't really, if she communicates with him when he's ill, he won't communicate well if there is any communication going on, you know, that I don't particularly believe, but I wanted it to be in normal circumstances. So Watson went for his horrendous operation and had the tumour removed. He was actually okay up until then. He wasn't ill. He was a little bit, like I said, we weren't sure he was enjoying life, because nothing seemed to particularly make him happy, but he'd had Campylobacter poisoning this time last year and was just getting over that. And so, you know, other than that, he was fine. There was nothing you could say was wrong with him. When he went with the walker, he would just sort of dawdle alongside the walker, and occasionally he would run around, and occasionally he would pick up a stick, but he wasn't full of the joys of life or anything. But after his operation, obviously he was extremely ill, because he had, you know, a bit like that removed from his underarm area, because they had to get margins. That was on, I think, the 7th of January. A week later, on the 15th of January, I got the first impressions from the psychic. Aside from the fact of what she said, which I'm going to read you the email, I thought, what she had said was, sorry that it was later than intended, but she'd got a bug, a stomach virus and a cold, and had been extremely ill. But I just felt like, again, if you're a communicator, somebody could have let me know. They must have known that I would be eager to receive that communication before Christmas, because they told me it would be way before Christmas. And I think she's got an assistant, because it was the assistant that was emailing me. The assistant could have let me know. In fact, a Merry Christmas email went out a couple of days before Christmas, which was them asking for people to, you know, book on courses that she's got going on and go and see her in different countries. So I felt like there was definitely a lack of communication with me. So I had replied to her and said, look, you know, I didn't really want these first impressions just now, because circumstances have changed, and so I wouldn't want to go ahead with a reading at this time, because he's ill. You know, I said he is ill, and actually she mentioned, she kept on mentioning things she said in the first impressions, because she thought she'd got it right and she hadn't. But she got quite shirty then and was like, well, I've already put in a lot of work to make these first impressions. I communicated with him yesterday. She was saying that she was communicating with him the day before. And I said, well, okay, fair enough. You've already done the work. Let me consider whether I want to go forward or not. And then I didn't, and she was okay when I said I didn't. I replied and said I don't want to go ahead, and she was okay. But yeah, I just, certainly the communication with her humans wasn't great. So let me read you her exact words for her first impression, and I'll tell you at each point she's made how true it is or otherwise. So the first thing she said is, Watson comes across as a private and complex dog. That's true, he definitely is. He doesn't like being stared at. This one was really interesting, because it's actually the opposite. We understand that dogs in general don't like being stared at. So for her to say that isn't an unusual thing, because generally dogs don't like being stared at. But we have always noticed that actually Watson's fine with it. We can sit and look at him and he doesn't look away. He will stare us. In fact, he does that to try and get a treat. He will sit and stare at me and stare at his dad, and his gaze doesn't move. So that was completely wrong. It feels like you treat him like your baby. Definitely I do, but you know, I think most people nowadays, especially if you were going to an animal psychic, you're that level with your dog, I think everybody could be accused of treating them like a baby. Now it says at the moment he feels understimulated. He wants more adventure, more fun. I didn't know what to make of this because he'd had an operation 1 week ago. And so you could say that when she got in touch with him, i.e. the day before, he's recovering from a major operation. And so, because I replied to her actually, and I asked her, I said, can you tell me the answers that you got from him, are they general about his life or are they about that day? You know, is he telling you how he felt in that moment, or is he telling you how he feels in general? And she replied and said, that's for you to decide. Which again, to me, is just a bit too vague, because then it can, you know, the answers can be made to fit a circumstance. But it said he feels understimulated, he wants more adventure and more fun. And I thought that this is why I didn't want the first impressions whilst he was ill, because if that had come through before he had his operation, it would have been ridiculous. He's the most stimulated dog with the most adventure and the most fun than any dog I know, honestly, other than ones that I see on Facebook that do. I don't know anybody that does as much enrichment training, as much training, as many games, as many different walks as I do. We make sure that he has 2 different walks every day, and then he has his shorter walks to different places. He goes somewhere different every day, doesn't go to the same place twice, or apart from with the walker, but he's in a big group. He has group activities, he has training with me, he gets an enrichment game every night. There is no room for more adventure or more stimulation in his life. The more fun bit, I mean, that's the question I'm asking, is he having fun in life? But if it applied to that particular day, well, yes, it was a week after his operation. He probably was thinking, I want more adventure and stimulation and fun because I'm lying here recovering from an operation. So I suppose on that, it's up to you whether or not you think that that is correct or not. It was correct at the time she communicated with him, if that's what she did. Next, it said he misses mental stimulation and pack walks. Same kind of thing. He misses pack walks. It had only been a week since he'd been having pack walks, and he's always had pack walks because he's always been with a walker for, you know, sometimes only a couple of days a week, sometimes full time. There's been differences depending on my health, but he's always had pack walks. So I was like, to say he's missing it, he's missing mental stimulation and pack walks, again, does make sense in that he hasn't had it for a week because he was too ill. So I wasn't sure what to make of that. He would also like more interaction. This one I was like, okay, that's maybe fair enough, because a lot of the enrichment games are given to him. I do sit with him, but I know that he has a thing about, if I get my phone out when it's evening playtime after his walk, he will stop what he's doing and look at me as if to say, this is our time, put your phone down. And so I would imagine he does want more interaction. I think probably most dogs do. It says, it feels like you are very affectionate with him, maybe even a bit too much, a bit smothering. That is probably true. I do smother him a bit. I try not to. I try very hard not to, actually. But yeah, I could say that that is true. It says, there's also a feeling he misses your husband. Does he travel or go away? At the time, Kev hadn't travelled anywhere. He has since travelled with his business, but he hadn't travelled at the time. But Watson does miss him a lot during the day, and he goes crazy when he gets home from work. So you could say that that was true. Next, it says he showed a twisted rope and a green ball. That I couldn't place because he has got some balls which are, it's got a red, yellow and blue ball, because they come in packs of red, yellow and blue, so no green at all. And there was no twisted rope even in his toy box, but he doesn't really play with balls and he doesn't play with toys. The only thing we do is we play a game of tug, and it's not with a rope or anything like that. It's with nothing like that. So that didn't make any sense at all. It says here there is a concern at the bottom of his lumbar spinal issue. And do you remember I said, when I spoke to her, I said he's ill. So I wanted to kind of pause the communication. She went, oh yeah, that's his lumbar spinal issue. And I said to her, no, it's nothing to do with his back. I said, it's actually a tumour. And I said, it's under his arm. And she went, oh yes, it's on his left side. And I was like, no, actually it's on his right side. So I felt like she was trying to clutch at things that she thought she'd got right. Next it says, there's a bed in the kitchen. It seems oblong and mattress-like with a checked pattern. This one is difficult because there is a bed in the kitchen. It's sort of oblong, and I mean, I think most beds are. Not many beds are completely square. Most beds are oblong. It wasn't mattress-like at all, and it had a slight checked pattern if you looked very closely. Looking at a distance, it just looked like a green bed, but when you looked very closely, it did have a checked pattern on it. But again, I think a lot of beds do, but that's maybe just me being cynical. He likes to be on the furniture, and it feels like he sleeps downstairs at night. This one I don't know what to make of. Yes, he likes to be on the furniture. Again, I think that's most dogs are allowed on the furniture nowadays, and it feels like he sleeps downstairs at night, but there is no downstairs here, and he doesn't sleep in one particular place. He can sleep in the living room some nights behind the window. Sometimes he sleeps on the couch. Sometimes he sleeps beside us, like down the side of our bed. Sometimes he sleeps in his own, what we call his bedroom, which is his crate. And so I didn't know what to make of. He sleeps downstairs at night. And it says he's aware of a white cat, and then in brackets it says maybe in spirit. This one, yes, there is a white cat that comes to our window. He's very aware of it. He hates it because the cat is always sort of teasing him, if you like, and he doesn't like cats in general. So that one I was like, okay, fair enough. But again, he's aware of a white cat doesn't really tell you much, does it? Next it says sometimes his paws feel fiery. This one was spot on because he does have itchy paws, and I would say it isn't something she could have guessed at from his photo, because his photo is obviously his dark skinned, and we would say that more about like white dogs. Most white dogs have skin allergies apparently, because I always was thinking, what can she ascertain from? She wanted to know his name, how long we'd had him, and his breed. So that's all she knew about him. So that was pretty spot on. And then the final thing she said was the worst of all. It said he currently feels unhappy, down, depressed, not living his full life, restricted. This was information that to me, had I have got it when he wasn't ill, would have been devastating. It was still upsetting because I thought, well, he's recovering from a huge operation, so it would make sense if he's unhappy, down, depressed. He's not living his full life because he's had this operation. He is restricted because he's had this operation. He could barely walk. He had to drip a drain in the scar, and I had to try and cover him up in a robe every time we went out so that it didn't get infected, or if he tried to roll on it, that he didn't like pull the drain or the stitches out. So he was all of those things, but my question to her was, is this related to this week, or is this related to his life? Because I want a reading that is about his life, not about him recovering from an operation. Hopefully you understand what I mean by that. And she just seemed very frustrated with me for that. But I was saying to her, obviously he's going to be unhappy, restricted, etc. when he's just had a major operation. When I applied, if you like, or whatever, when I emailed about having this reading, it was to find out about his life, his normal life, when he was in normal health, and find out answers then, not a week after a major operation. But like I said, she just got a bit shirty with that. So that was it. That's it for the first impressions. And I just, you know, I spoke to my friend about it, spoke to my husband about it, and I just thought, you know what, there's not enough there for me. That was spot on. The only thing that was spot on really was the paws. Perhaps you could say the white cat, but for me, there's white cats everywhere. Maybe that's just, again, me being cynical. And some of the things to me were just so general about dogs that I felt really let down by it, actually, because like I said, it wasn't, if I'd have got that reading without him having an operation, if I'd have got it a week earlier, I would have been able to make sense more of it. If it had been the same thing a week earlier, I would have said this is just a lot of rubbish, because he certainly isn't not living his full life or restricted, etc., you know. But to get that after he had an operation was just, it was so tricky to know what to do. So I left it. You know, I told her that he was ill and that, you know, for that reason I wouldn't be going ahead. And like I said, she was absolutely fine. But it hasn't done anything to affect my opinion one way or another, really. If anything, it's made me more cynical. And I'm still tempted to have, I would still like to have that face-to-face where they claim to be talking to the dog, especially now, because since he recovered from his operation, he's like a different dog. He is happy, just happy to be alive. He's eating his food. He wasn't eating his food before. He's loving his food. He's loving playing with other dogs. You know, he's just a happy, happy boy now. So I'm not as worried now. So I'm not as desperate, if you like, to get in touch with the psychic. But I would still be interested in having that one-to-one and them asking, you know, supposedly communicating with him and seeing what he says, because he's so different from any normal dog. He still doesn't like toys or anything. And so the usual things don't really apply to him. You know, he's food motivated in some ways, like he'll go and rob things from a barbecue, but he's still not that food motivated at home. I could leave a treat out on a table and he won't touch it. And also, like I said, I think I do give him mental stimulation. I give him a lot of mental stimulation. He's got a very active and I believe fun life. You know, he cannot wait to get home after he's been out for a walk with the walkers, they say that, but also with us. You know, he can't wait to get home. If he's been out for a long walk, he trots up the hall and goes and jumps on our bed and has a good old sleep. If he's been out for the evening walk with my husband, he comes bombing down the hallway because he knows I've made him an enrichment game. So, you know, I do know now that he's showing that he's got a happy life now. So we wonder, actually, did he have... I've spoken to the vets about this and I said, although this cancer it turned out to be just local, could it have affected him? And she said he was probably still recovering from the Campylobacter, because that can take a long, long time, the poisoning that he had. But also the cancer can make you tired because your body is still trying to, you know, it's still got something foreign in it. And so that could have been affecting him. So that's everything to tell you about my experience. So I would love to hear if any of you have had an experience with a communicator. I would love to hear what your opinions are. Do you believe it all? Do you think it's rubbish? I can't imagine, if you think it's all rubbish, I wouldn't imagine you would be watching this video. There must be some kind of interest in it if you're watching this video. It's like me, I don't feel like I believe it, but I just want to keep on. You know, I'd probably do it again. If I had the money, or in fact, you know, I'm getting birthday money soon, I might well, if I found somebody that sounded genuine, it's something I would do out of interest. I've been to see a couple of psychics in like theatres and things, and I find the experience really interesting. And at the moment I watch Hollywood Medium with the young guy, I can't remember his name. Anyway, that's everything for today. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon.